Hi, this is Ginger Cook. Today I'm going to give you some basic palette knife painting techniques. This entire little woodland tree scene was done with a palette knife, and the trees were painted differently than the background and so forth. And so what I'm going to focus on is just a very short, quick, some fun, easy tools you can use and ways to use a palette knife so that you can be more adaptive with the palette knife and find some easier ways to use it. So first off, you don't just throw the brush out. When you're doing a palette knife painting, there's going to be some brushes involved. It's not cheating any more than it's cheating to use a dictionary when you're trying to look up a word to spell it. Certain processes have to happen. So first off, you need to put some sort of background, and the simplest way to do that is use a brush. So I'm going to move my little picture out of the way. And what we're going to do, and now of course one of the things you can do with the palette knife besides painting with it is you can mix paint. So let's mix some yellow, some sort of green background. We're going to just do a close-up, I think, of a tree. So I want a woodland background in the background. So I have ultramarine blue here. Ultramarine blue and yellow make sort of an army green like that, and I'll add a little bit of brown to it. That's burnt sienna. And I want this sort of, and more blue. I want a little sort of darker Christmas tree, dark olive green color. All right, now I'm going to take a little phthalo blue, come over here like that. See that? And I'm going to add a little tiny bit of yellow to that. And I'm going to do a little bit of cad red medium, and I'm going to make even a darker green like that. All right, so I've got two colors of green. I've got this real dark green, and let me just zoom in so you can see it. I've got this very dark green and this lighter. They're close to the same value. What I mean by that is they're absolutely close to the same value. And people always say, well, what does she mean by that, close to the same value? Well, on a gray scale, for instance, here's your grayscale, and these are the dark sides of the grayscale. And so these two colors are probably about here and here. Then it's not quite black, but it's maybe here and here. You see that? They're pretty close, but they're all right for our darker background. All right, so now I'm going to just wipe off the excess paint on the side of my plate like that. And then wipe this palette knife off. Get in the habit, probably for wiping off palette knives, I'm using a rag. Probably a paper towel would be good. I'm going to take a large brush, because again, we're just going to do a close-up. Here's our trees and our logs and stuff, and I'm just going to do a little close-up of one of these little backgrounds, just to kind of give you some tips on how to use a palette knife. So I'm going to start with the darkest color. Come on like this. Down and across, down and across. I'm actually weaving a pattern. I'm not trying not to have texture. And I always go down and across, down and across. If it's not water or something where I need some smooth lines, then this is the way I always cover canvases. Down and across, like that. And I'm just going to kind of do a vignette like this. We're going to do a vignette. There you go. So I've covered this like that, and I'm going to do the whole canvas. I just want you guys to see how to use a palette knife. And let's take some of this lighter color. Maybe I'll come up here, make it a little lighter as we go up, like that, around here. Kind of blend these in to the edges. Here we go, kind of blend it out so it's a little lighter around the edges, like this. Always working into the wet paint. Always working into the wet paint so that this all sort of melts together. Even when you're doing a background like this, it's possible to do a slightly gradated background. I'm going to zoom back out so you can see what I'm doing here. Okay? Now I'm going to add a little yellow, like this. I'm just going to come around here to the bottom, add a little yellow. Just trying to cover the canvas up, like this. Alright, so I've got this sort of dark area in the center. I'm going to turn this over, like this. And since you may have noticed that it uses up, when you're doing this technique, it uses up paint fairly quickly. So I'm going to mix colors right on the canvas now. A little ultramarine blue, a little yellow. And I want it a little bit darker in here. So I'm going to put a little more ultramarine blue in the center. And come down here like this, using this cross pattern. Okay? Now normally if I was doing something like this, say this is some sort of wooden background, I'm just going to stop right about here and dry it before I kind of run out of room for my fingers. Just take a minute and just dry this. It's good to have your background dry. It's kind of a foundation to build everything else on. And I want to have a little room to use my palette knife. I want to make sure I have enough room to use it. I'm going to darken this up here down at the bottom since we've dried all this. Like that, just down and across. And kind of, do you see where I'm turning the brush over as I do that? As long as we're showing you stuff. Down and across, and I kind of push this into the rest of the canvas. Like that, down, across, down, across. There we go. Sorry, so we've got some, nice deep dark background for my woods. Now I'm going to give this a good dry. Opposed to a bad dry, I guess. A little longer. There's some argument about, school of thought about using a hairdryer. Some people feel, my daughter included, that you just need cold air. I'm not a big fan of cold air. I know it'll work, but I know hot air works quicker. And then I just take the cold button at the end. There's a cold button on the hairdryer, and on the very end I hit it with cold air. That's the secret. There's this cold button here on the end of the hairdryer. So I use the high heat, hold it very close, make sure it's dry, and then it'll still feel tacky. And then you hit it with the cool and kind of set it. That is the fastest way to dry something. My personal opinion, everybody has different techniques, So if you've been watching Cinnamon on Heart Party, that's my daughter, she and I disagree on all kinds of stuff. But we're fun and friendly about it, She has her opinions about certain things and I do mine. And also there's a lot of different ways to paint stuff and neither one of us are wrong. You got to know that too, depending on what you're trying to accomplish. So that brush is going in water. Now you'll notice on this, we're not doing the whole tree thing. We're just going to do some of this. I'm going to just show you some palette knife techniques. There's sort of an interesting model background before there's any logs. So the trick to that, and here's the deal with your palette knife. There's a couple ways to hold it. When we're doing it like this on an edge, you know how we're scraping up. You can see how we just scrape up paint, then kind of maybe pile it if you're mixing paint. Now one of the things I notice artists do when they're mixing paint is they mix it and mix it and mix it like it's cookie dough. And guess what? It's not cookie dough. It's not cake mix. It's paint. And for a palette knife, the less you mix, the better, because you want some multicolors in here. So I've just sort of scraped up the rest of this little bit of green. I'm going to add some yellow to this. Now look at that. I'm not mixing it very much. And let's see, maybe I'll take a little burnt sienna, a little tiny bit of that, just add there. Not much. I'm not mixing it in. I'm just sort of adding to it. Maybe a drop of white. There. Ooh, that's nice. Couple. Like that. Okay? Now, I'm going to just show you. I'm going to flatten this out like that. And you see how there's, can you see this? There's a lot more colors in there. It's not all one color, right? Then I'm going to scrape this up on the side of my brush. And let me just show you that again. If I wipe the brush off like this, so it's clear, metal, I'm going to just sort of scrape it up on the side of my brush like this. Now I've got some, all right? And I'm going to say that I've got something over here. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to drag the brush. We're going to drag the palette knife, which is not the brush, but it's going to act like our brush. We're going to drag it across the canvas like this. We're going to start here and then kind of flatten it and let it skip. Do you see how it wants to skip? Now, if you keep going over it, it will be solid. So let's get a little more like this. You start here and then you roll it flat, barely touch it. This is a very light touch. See this sort of marbling technique that I get in the background? And the very dark is showing underneath, all right? Now, I'm not going to mess with that. Let me show you what happens when you mess with it. If you mess with it, then you just have something kind of ugly and flat. So, all right, so I want to fix that. So I'm going to take the little ultramarine blue and just barely touch it. Just barely touch that and come over this like this. Now, when you're using palette knife paint, now see, here's some blue on my brush. I'm going to put it here like this and then start it at an angle and then flatten it out. Barely touch it, flatten it out. Now, if you treat this like it's a sunburned surface and it's hurting the bottom little surface, it's going, ow, every time you touch it, you'll have the touch light enough. This is a very light touch because all this paint's wet. All right, now let me just show you here. I've got some yellow paint here on my brush. Kind of mix it into here, but not very much, like that, see? I keep saying it's a brush, but it's not. It's my knife, okay? I'm going to start up here and then start rolling it flat, pulling it this way, barely touching it. And I'm going to say I've got some pattern over here, some sort of trees, some sort of woodland trees like this, see? I'll say that maybe I'll wiggle it a little bit, say there's some woodland trees. You don't get to do much. Once it's on there, it's done, okay? So if you don't like it, dry it, but you can't keep fooling with it. Then we're going to come up here, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to kind of do some sort of flat stuff up here and wiggle the knife into the yellow a little bit, like that. All right, now what you do at this point, just dry it. Dry it in between. This is the secret. Dry it in between. You can skin it over. It doesn't have to be real dry, but you can skin it over. You can skin it over. Now, I think I'm going to keep going lighter, so I'm going to add a little bit more yellow to this and a little white. A little tiny bit of red so it's not too bright. A little bit more yellow, a little bit more white. And please notice that I'm not mixing this paint that well. Do you see that? There, now, I want something light up here. All right, so here's my lighter paint. I can come here and kind of wiggle the palette knife and hold it flat like this. And then I can get some interesting foliage just by doing that. All right, I've got made some sort of little wild bush here. You see that? There's the top of the bush. Okay, now, if that were too, suppose you just got too much of that. Let's take some dark blue, ultramarine blue, put it back in this mixture, right over this. It's still wet. I'm barely touching it. Now I've gone flat on you. Barely touching it, and I can barely take it, and I can put another little layer of dark over that if you get too much. But at some point, you have to kind of stop. So, all right, so there's some sort of little bushy thing, right? Right there, like that. Okay, now, for me, I might want something else a little brighter. Now, there's some different kinds of palette knives, and we'll talk about this. I'm just using, there's different shapes of palette knives. Gosh, when I first started using a palette knife years ago, you could hardly buy anything. Now there's a ton. Let's just suppose that I wanted something a little lighter pattern up here. And I'm using just on the tip now. I'm barely touching this, and I'm going to add, kind of this light gray. I'm barely touching over this. Just adding another layer of color. It doesn't take much, but it sucks it up really fast. See that? Barely touching this, like that, and I'm adding another little layer of color on top of this little tree here that I wanted to do. Okay? All right, now I think I'm going to have like a little tree right here, and maybe a log at the bottom. And then back in here, we didn't really do anything, because I'm not really creating a painting. I'm just kind of telling you how you might do something. Oh, I know what let's do. Let's make a rock. This is fun. Let's make a rock. Let's take some dark brown and some burnt umber and some ultramarine blue. That's a burnt umber, a little bit of cad red medium, ultramarine blue. Let's mix together. Let's make us a dark rock. Here we go. Now, I'm going to just put a rock right here with my palette knife. I'm going to say I'm going to grab a palette knife right down here like this, and I'm going to say here's a rock. And rocks have hard edges. So now I'm going flat with a palette knife, and you see how I haven't mixed the color all that well, but I've said that there's a rock here. I'm going to be kind of careful because I didn't dry that green. Kind of sweep it down this way and say here's a rock. Here's a rock. Now, we are so close to the same values between here and here that this rock, you can't even hardly see that I've created a rock, can you? You can't. So, what do we do about that? Well, let's take some white and green. And so I'm saying that this is a rock here. So, I can take a palette knife like this. Now I'm using just the edges of it. And like this. And I can... Now, I've gone around this rock like that, using just the knife, and I've cut in a little lighter area around this rock. Do you see that? And maybe I'm going to take a bite out of this right here. Let's say I can scrape off some of this paint, wipe it off, come up here. Now this is while it's still wet, and say that there's some sort of rock like this. And then maybe here, let's just say up in here, this is more rock. I think we were going to do a tree, but we can still do a tree. All right, so now I've said that there's this sort of interesting rock going here. What would happen if I scrape some lines out from the background, just using my palette knife? That's stuff you can do. See that? You can scrape off if you needed something. Like that's an example of things you could do with palette knives, and maybe scrape some lines, cracks in the rocks, like that. Say that there's some sort of cracks, maybe something going across this way. And if you don't like it, here's the trick. If you don't like it, pull it out. Pull it out, do another one. Maybe you don't like that one. Maybe you want a line going this way. Maybe you feel like the rock would be more rock-like if you change the direction of some of these cracks. All right, now those are some examples of what you can do with the painting knife, palette knife. See, I'm putting it up on the edge. Now if I need this edge, and I have the paint here, I have to turn this way, so that when I start with this little roll of paint, I'm starting it here on the edge and then dragging it that way. Do you see that? I'm dragging it that way. Now this is where you're doing, I just want you to see the difference between holding it flat and then using it as a very, very more solid background. See that? Then I'm going to come up here and say that there's some of this. I want a little bit lighter around here. A little bit lighter around here. Okay, now this is what we're talking about when you're building up layers. I'm telling you, even though this is a practice exercise, we're just making it up. We're making it up. This is a practice exercise, and we're making it up. If you just do something like this, if you just try it, the whole idea behind this is to let you see what you can do with a palette knife. Now, does that mean you throw away your brush completely? Absolutely not. You can still use a brush. Let's just suppose, for the sake of argument, that I wanted a little tree up here. Now I'm thinking this, all right, didn't really intend to do a painting, you guys, but see, that brush is kind of shot. Let me find one that isn't. Here, I'm going to say that up here is a little tree. Got a little tree coming up here like this in my woods. Maybe it forks right there. Again, you're not seeing this very well because it's pretty dark. I've said it's a pretty dark tree. I've got a little tree coming here. And the idea behind this is to just show you some things you can practice with. Now, this is still wet, all right? This is wet when I touch it. This is wet. This is all kind of wet. Now, particularly if you're using gels with your palette knife, if you're coming in here using like a heavy gloss golden gel or something like that, so to extend it, because you can add about 50% gel and get more bang for your buck, only in the sense that it gives you more volume in your paint, and gels are less expensive than your paint. And so sometimes if you're doing a large painting, we're doing something like 6x8, but if I was doing a large painting, I'd put gel, but that would slow the drying time down. I might have to do this over several days, like an oil painting, where you have to let it sort of skin over. You can heat it with a hairdryer and skin it over somewhat, and what I mean by skin it over is this, that it's kind of, if you were to poke it with the needle, it would still be wet, but it might be dry to the touch. So let's just skin this over for a minute. And skin over the paint, just so I can still put another layer on top. I'm using hot air and hold it here. Now another little trick is to take up something like this, like a piece of wood. Force the air back. Force the air back. Okay, so now, is it dry? No, but it's dry to the touch. That's all I need it to be, dry to the touch. I probably, on a large painting, would never consider using like a little plate. I'm just using a plate because it's easy, but I wouldn't use a plate. I'm going to take some white color like this, so titanium white, put it on a new plate, and I want some ultramarine blue. And I'm going to take some cad red medium like this, and I'm going to make a gray. See how I made that gray? Sort of a rock gray color, like that. Wipe off the excess. I didn't mix it that much. I mixed it a little bit, but not that much. And I'm going to say, so still see we're not completely dry because you see how the paint's sticking to that. All right, so I'm going to say on the top of this rock here that I've got some light. Light's going to come from here. Got some light. I'm going to skip down a space, barely touching this, holding this very flat. I want you to see how the texture underneath the rock, the brown texture, actually makes some of this for you. You know, it makes the texture for you. And where I put it on very thick, it covered up the rock. And where I didn't put it on real thick, it sort of skipped over and left these little kind of little bumps. Now, I want it a little bit darker on this side. I'm going to say that this side's a little more shaded. So I'm going to add a bit more color to my gray. And again, I'm not mixing it that much. I'm just adding more deeper tones, less white in other words. And I'm going to say that there's the gray side of this rock here, like this. See? And I may still want that a little darker. So let's just make that darker still. Again, I'm not trying to mix much. I'm going to come over here like that, darken this up. There we go. So this side I want a little bit darker, like that. Here's my gray rock. Okay, now skin it over and dry it. And while that's drying, gosh, I was going to make this about a 5-minute demonstration, but I wanted you to kind of see it, and I didn't know how else you were going to see it if I didn't do it this way, because I can show you how to make a real painting. This is really not the painting, but I'm going to come back in here with some lighter colors, some yellow and white, some lighter colors here, and I want some lighter bushes here. So because we dried this a little, I can make another little row of lighter bushes here in front of those. See that? I've just said these are some lighter bushes like that right here. And I think that's kind of neat. You can kind of see how I did that because it's catching all the color, right? Now, here we would put something else, and we can glaze over this. We can do so many things. Let's real quick work on these trees. So what did we say about these trees? Well, we didn't say anything about them at this point, but we did kind of paint in some sort of brown so that we'd have somewhere to go. I think we should make these birch trees because this thing is so dark. So I'm going to start with some white paint and a little of this brown paint. Come over here like this. Kind of the same kind of gray color I made here. Like that. And then I want to come, make sure that, here's the trick. Wipe off the excess paint off your knife. Scrape up the paint on one side. Tilt the paint. Let's see, we said that the light was coming kind of, where did we say it? Kind of on top this way. We're going to, just for the ease of turning this canvas, I'm going to say it's coming this way. All right, the paint's on here. I'm holding the edge straight up here like this, touching it, and then tilting it a little bit toward me and pulling it. Do you see that? And I'm pulling it right over this tree, and I'm actually kind of ignoring my brown. Brown was almost just a guide here. See that? And because I didn't mix the paint very well, I have a lot of different colors in that. I'm going to do the same thing to this one. Reload the brush, all just on the edge, reload it. Excuse me, I keep saying brush, but it's a palette knife. Bear with me here. It's been a long day. Here, I'm going to keep going this way, pulling this, pulling it like this, pulling it toward me, kind of the way over there we were pulling it. So we're not laying it flat now. We're keeping it on its edge, and we're barely touching, and we're pulling it. Pull it this way, like that. See? Now, that's kind of nice. I got that little light. So I'm going to come right on top of this, maybe even make this tree a little bit bigger, lengthen this one, just barely touch it. Okay, so here's these two trees, like that. Okay, now that's a start, right? It's not great, but that's a start. Okay, so what happens if you just take some white paint now, everything's still wet, coming over here. I flatten out the paint. That's my secret. I flatten out the paint and then scrape up a little. Flatten it out. I think I'm probably flatten it out. Now I've got this little tiny bit of an edge here, right? Now this is still wet. Now I could dry it, but I want to show you what happens if I don't. I could dry it, but I can barely touch it. And as I come this way, I can still add some highlights to this tree, even while it's still wet, and make this little birch tree. Do you see that? Okay, see like that? Now it's still wet, and the advantage of doing it while it's still wet is what? Because it starts to blend. You get all these colors in here, which would be darn tricky if you were hand painting this. All right, so back to white. Back to white paint. Let's see, I've got some right here. I'm going to put a little more. I'm going to show you how to do both sides. And you don't give up all your stuff that you know about painting just because you happen to be using a knife. A knife is a good thing to use for a technique. Again, we're going to flatten out the white. Now, what would happen if we added a tiny bit, like less than 1% of burnt sienna to this? All right, it's behind us. It's not quite. We're going to warm it up. It's behind this other tree. A little tiny bit of burnt sienna, about 1%. See, I flatten the paint out, and then I put up a little. Don't get too much. Little tiny bit of paint. That's almost too much. I'm just going to scrape up a little bit, about like that. I do a lot of scraping and then putting it back, and scraping and putting it back. Again, I'm going to line this. I'm kind of sitting right over this, and I'm going to pull this back like that. Now, because I added the warm color, look how much brighter this tree is than this one. Do you see that? Because I added this warm color, and it got a little bit lighter on us. Now, if I wanted that color over here, haven't dried anything yet, I could add a little bit to this edge, but I'm out of paint. And if you try to keep doing more than a little tiny bit at a time, this is the secret. If you try to keep doing a little more at a time, you get poor results. All right, so there. Okay, so we've done that. Now, I'm looking at that going, that's okay. I'm not wild about it. So what? I could go, even without drying it, back to the gray. Okay, I didn't like that one. The one I did. Thing with a palette knife, unlike a regular acrylics, is you get this so thick, it's kind of hard to redo stuff over. But I'm going to show you here. I'm going to come right back on here on this little tree and pull some gray back. Just like that. I'm going to pull a little tiny bit of gray back on this back one because I wasn't as fond of all that light stuff. So to just sort of tone that down. And you have some leeway. I mean, you're not stuck. You're not stuck with just the last thing you did. All right? You're not stuck. And I think kind of like those trees. Okay? All right, they're sort of interesting. But what if I wanted a branch? Well, this is all okay, but what if I wanted a branch? Maybe I want something lighter gray up here too. Oh gosh, we're just really, changing our minds all the time when we paint this. Well, it's evolving. When you're making stuff up, it's evolving. And I hope you're understanding how to use the knife. This isn't about this picture at all. This is about how to use the palette knife. So I've got I'm making a lighter gray, added some more white. And I wanted to say, this is kind of a chance to sort of skin over. So I want to add some light highlights on the top of this rock, right here, just on the top. And I can skip over just on the top of this one and add some light highlights. You see that? That rock is even a little bit lighter than that. And what you probably have figured out by now, if you're doing this with me, is that you use up some serious amount of paint doing this. This takes some paint. All right, now I'm adding more white to that gray, lightening it up even more, trying not to mix it too much. And I want a hard edge somewhere. I want a hard edge on the top of this rock. There we go. I want a hard edge here. And then maybe I want a hard edge right here. I can pull a hard edge like that. Skip it. Let's take a little tiny bit of white. Want a little bit lighter. Little tiny bit of white. Keep it very flat. Just in a couple places I'll lighten up the top of that rock, right like that. Okay, so there, you kind of see, maybe I've got another little ledge here where the rock is lighter. Let's take a lighter gray here. Say that right here there's another little ledge on this rock that's lighter. Could be a two-tone rock, see? like that. There's a good little ledge here. There's some rock. The rocks are generally not just one thing like this. There's ledges and there's stuff. But, you know, okay, we're saying there's that right there. Pull that. Okay, there's our rock. Okay. What do you do? What can we do now that would make this interesting? Well, first off, let's just kind of cement everything, dry it in. Just dry everything. Now here's what you could do. Again, you are not obligated, because you said you did something with the palette knife, you are not obligated to do every single thing with the palette knife. So let's just say that you wanted this rock to have more of a ledge. You put it in there and you kind of liked it and you thought, you know what, I could have a little dark behind this rock. And what if it was a little darker right here? You can come back with a small brush. You can add some details with a small brush. You're not obligated just because you started off with this. You can certainly go back. Maybe you're going to come back here with your trees, and maybe just here at the bottom you're going to, you know, kind of fill in where your tree goes. It's okay. That's not the end of the world if you were to do that. You could do that. You could take this brush and maybe make some. We'll just, for the sake of argument here, maybe we'll come in here like this, and we'll say that there's some sort of little tree branch, a little wiggly tree in here. And I'm going to skip over some places so that it looks like it's kind of buried behind. There's some sort of little bush here. And it probably would be better if it was not a gray bush, so perhaps we'll just do brown. I'll go over this with a little brown, like this. So you can use a brush to suggest that there's something happening with your picture. You know, maybe there's another little branch over here. Now, that's one way. You can use a brush, and you can use tiny brushes, but you can also use a knife to make. You can also use a knife to do highlights. For instance, like on this branch, if I wanted to say the light was coming on the top, maybe the highlight would be here. It would be brown, and the light would be on top of this. But you can use, I'm going to say that there's some sort of little twig growing out of here like that. But you can use a palette knife to do that too. So consider this. Consider this. Gosh, how did we can get going so much with this. I don't know, how much time have I got? 30 minutes of this. I was going to do 15, but I get carried away. You know, I was just going to show you some crazy demonstrations on how to do something. All right. All right, so I've just taken some of this paint that's in here and mixed a little brown like that. Now, here's what you want to do. You want to take a piece of paper when you're doing stuff like this and test it. Do it like this and lift it up and test it. If you go flat, that's what happens. So try to, if it's vertical, nothing happens. Well, you can sometimes get a little tiny line. So it has to tilt a little bit towards you. And left-handed people, you're going to have to figure this out. I'm not real sure the best way to do this left-handed, but the idea is the same. Now look, you're going to test it and lift it up like that. So that's too big a glob on the palette knife. So I'm going to wipe my palette knife clean. Make sure it's perfectly clean and has a good sharp edge. Plastic palette knives do not work. They don't work for this. They're just only for mixing paint, and I hate them for that. So if you have a plastic palette knife, I just personally, Ginger hates them. All right, so there's a little tiny bit of paint. You see that? Now I'm going to do this, like one test here. I like that test. So now, what happens? What if we said that there was a little branch? Kind of turn your picture. We're going to say that there's a little branch going up into here like that. See? And maybe I'll come over here on this edge. I want this to be a dark edge on this little branch right here, this little tree trunk that I just did. So I'll pull a little bit toward me. And you're not painting, what you're not doing is this. You're not doing this. You are keeping it flat and using the edge. You know, for this kind of stuff, you're using the edge. You don't want it real thick. You always see me flattening it out if I don't like the edge I've got. and then re-scraping. I'm scraping the edge. Now I'm going to come up here like this maybe. And just do some of it like this. Let's see. Maybe I want a little, ooh, got to do this upside down because the dark's got to be at the bottom. All right, so I said that this is a pretty long palette knife for this branch, but you get the idea. And you get about 1 or 2 shots, and then you have to reload. Does that make sense? You get about 1 or 2 shots, and then you can't just keep using, you can't just keep, you know, pressing the knife. You about every second stroke, you've got to reload. And I already had you do a practice one before you ever touched your canvas, all right? So I already said that there was a practice one here before you ever touched it. See that? I'm going to say up here like that. And so I'm putting some branches up in this tree. And if I added some more white to that brown, so you can kind of see the highlights of it, I'm going to add a little white to that brown. Just a little tiny bit so that you can kind of see where I'm going with this. All right, a little bit on the edge here now. Right here, and then maybe I said there was a branch here and I'm barely touching it. Okay, maybe here. A little branch. So if you can't see it, you can change the colors you're using. Another idea is to switch the palette knife. Switch your palette knife out. And the one I would switch out to is where? It was right here. Here. This palette knife is made by Jerry's Artarama. It's a Creative Mark 61. And what's nice about it, it has a lot of different edges. It has this one, it has this short one, it has this one. And Bob Ross was the first one to ever come up with a palette knife. The reason I like and you can still buy his, the reason I like the Creative Mark is I'm a terrible palette knife caretaker. I have a tendency to leave these in water, and a lot of times they'll rust. This one has, these kind never rust. These will take abuse. These Creative Mark palette knives are the perfect palette knife for the abusive artist who never puts their toys away as well as they should. Now I want this little edge here, see? So I'm going to start here and then pull a little tiny bit here on the edge, and then let's practice. See that? So now I've got a little, I want a little tiny one, so I'm using the short edge of this to make these branches. Can you see how I'm doing that? Short edge. And you've got to check it. Check it to make sure, because if you get a big flat blob, you're not going to be happy. So check it. Make sure that you've got just the length or the edge. And this is why it's sort of fun to have more palette knives, okay? That is why it's more fun. Here's a little bit here. Again, I'd like to scrape off, put a tiny little row, and start like that. All right. Now, what about this one? Well, at this point, I'm going to just get another plate. Because when you start mixing on here, you get too much colors going and it gets a little confusing. So if I wanted some branches coming up into here, well, before I do that, let's dry this and I'll show you another little trick. So we put some branches. Just kind of skim this over like this. Skim this over. Skim this over. Now, take this little palette knife again. We've got a little of this lighter paint left. Probably have some left. All right. Now, putting a little on here. I'm going to come over my tree again. Just a little bit. Lightening it up. Just some top. See, and so if you ended up the best way to say that, if you ended up painting over your branches and you don't have enough, you can always come back with a little green and kind of push them back underneath. That's the secret. You can make a little more green, but you saw how much paint we put out, and I'm already out here painting out some more paint. So here's a little brighter green, it's a little bit of bright green with a little bit of white in it, phthalo blue, and yellow and white. I'll put a tiny bit of cad red medium in it to knock it back. I'm not going to, I don't want to mix it very much. That's just, right. I'm going to come over here And I'm just going to add, now with the tip of this, I'm going to add just a tiny bit of the branches up here, just in a few places. I can control it. I have some control over what I'm doing here. I can shape the tree a little bit using just the tip. Just the tip. This is where you do that. See that here's a little bit here. You can see I've got sort of shaped this tree a little bit here, like that. So there is an advantage to doing something like this. I still feel like we need, something up here, but we're going to cut this short. And you could put some more branches coming off of this tree. We could have added something in the background here, which we didn't. I'm going to make some grass now. You with me? I'm going to just flatten this out, and I'm going to use the side of the brush, and I'm going to just test it once on the paper. I'm going to move it this way, and I'm going to come up here like this in front of this rock, like this, and I'm going to say that there's some grass growing up here. Maybe I'll put some more yellow with it. I want you to be able to see it. Okay, flattening it out, putting a little bit on the edge. Alright, holding it like this. I'm going to just say that there's some grass coming up here like this, in front of this rock. Maybe coming up this way. There's so many great things you can do with a palette knife. Maybe I want some dark grass. That might be better. Alright, so I'm going to take a little dark grass now. Because this was also light. Let's just give it some dark grass. Here, coming right over this like this. Holding this. I'm pulling in some grass right up like this. Kind of bearing this rock. You notice I get a few little grass things. Here's a plate so I can show you. Touch it. Make sure that you've got it. I'm going to come up here like this. Add some grass. Maybe I'll pull some. Now I'm kind of flattening it out, pulling it a little bit darker down here. So again, you ask yourself, where do you want to do the brush? Where do you want to do the palette knife? And you can combine it. You absolutely can combine it. And I think I want some white, little bit of bright grass now. Please note how little I am mixing this paint. Just going to take a little bit like this off of here. Now this edge is too fat, so I'm going to flatten out the grass and scrape it up again. Scrape it up again on the edge. Now, maybe I want some of this grass up here higher. Really growing over these trees. Again, if you get, here, I'm going to come over here like this, flatten out the paint, scrape it up. Can't emphasize that enough. And at some point, you may have to just clean your palette knife to get these lines. You have to clean it. See, I started off with the shiny one again. Now I'm going to come this way. Okay? Going to flatten it. Every time you flatten it, though, you mix the colors in together. The thing with this is if you can get it in the first few shots, you're better off. I'm going to come up here in front of this. People always say, how do you get texture? That's one way. So you've got some grass in front of these trees here. Set it up here like that. Put some grass. And I still think when I'm looking at this, and you can see it too, I feel like we need some very light grasses. So here I'm coming back to my second plate. Wipe the knife off. Flatten out my color. Boy, that's what I would tell you. Get in the habit. I'm glad we're just taking some time to do this. Get in the habit of flattening out your color. Too wide. Too wide. Okay, there we go. Flattening out your color. Here we go. Here's some grasses coming up. Move your plate, paint. Move your palette, your picture around so you can do it. The other knife you could use is this one. I'll show you. I like this one for the same reason. Because again, you have all these edges. Here's this one. I'm going to just flatten out the color. Now I'm going to pull some on the edge of this knife, like this. And if I wanted to say that there was a lot of stuff growing over here, just a lot of stuff coming out of this corner, like this knife would help me do it more. See, I'm saying there's a lot of grasses and stuff coming out of this corner, like that, kind of going this way. Kind of covered up my rock a little bit. And I'm kind of using up my paint here. You can appreciate that. And let's see, I need some more white. Now that's the trick. I am out of white already. And I still need some lighter grasses. So I could use, I'm going to take that and let's see, let me use a new color here. What have I got? I've got something called Australian Sienna. And I want to show you what happens when you marble a little color. It's called Australian Sienna. It's by Matisse. I want to show you how you marble something. It's a strange little tutorial, isn't it? It was really meant to be a 15-minute how do you do it. Okay, now, wipe the knife off. Look at the way this is marbled in here. See that? Didn't mix it very well. Flatten it. Put a little tiny bit on the brush. Just don't pull it far. Now, need some of these lighter grasses coming in here like that. It'd be hard to paint this, and don't be afraid to have some grasses maybe bent over. So here's what you would do. You would just maybe use the small side of this knife, like this, the little short side, like this. And maybe you're going to say that maybe one came up this way, and you can make a little bit of a curve if you're not trying to do too long of a line. You can kind of curve something. So maybe we can come up here like that. Say that there's some lighter stuff in here, like that. All right, so what have we created today? I mean, in pretty much next to nothing. We've kind of created a log. You know, we created a tree. I was going to show you how to do a log. I was starting out to show you how to do this. But really what I ended up doing was showing you how to make a rock and some trees and kind of how you use your palette knife. And really, if you were going to complete a painting like this, you would want to do something else with this background. This is just more of a practice thing on what how you can make your knife work. And honestly, I think that that's a kind of good thing, because part of me keeps wanting to turn this into a painting. The artist in me is going, but wait, there's a little bit. Yes, it's a practice, but we could take very little and we could turn it into a painting, which is true. What would happen if we came up here like this and warmed this tree up a little bit? A couple of places. Part of me wanted to do that right away, just warm that tree up. Part of me wanted to add some more warm grasses. Part of me wanted to take maybe a little orange and yellow, make a little kind of orange and yellow something. And I'm not sure what now, but I had an idea for doing something, right? Part of me wanted to, maybe do something else. Do I want to put any of this? Do I want any of this warm color here? Well, if I did that, then we'd have to change the whole picture. So no, I'm not going to do that. But anyway, you get the idea. And I do think I want to put something real dark back here in the corner. I like to darken the corners. So I'm going to just add some darker grasses back here like this, coming off the edge. There, just putting something dark back here. Make sure your palette knife's clean. We're going back here with some dark ones. This. Want something dark in here like this before we do the light ones. There. Okay, so I don't know, that seemed important to me at the time. Probably would have liked this corner dark to start with, but that's neither here nor there, because that's not how we painted it. So it's just we were just sort of messing around. But even messing around, you can see we got sort of an interesting picture. Sort of an interesting picture, even messing around. Going up with a little lighter green here in a few places. See, even messing around, we we were able to do some stuff. And I kind of like what we've got. And you can sort of see that this is how you would do, you know, a rock, how you would do a tree. You can glaze over some of these colors with your brush if they're too bright. You can come back and add some dark with a brush if it's too, if you haven't got, for instance, maybe you wanted something really dark behind this rock right here. Well, put it. Just come back with your dark paint and put it. You have some leeway. Just because you said it was a palette knife doesn't mean you just absolutely have to be married to everything you did. So if you think that these techniques, if you practice these techniques, the kind of the flat blade and scraping the paint and not mixing the colors all that well, try to get in the, even if you just did it on a piece of paper before you ever painted anything, even if you just forgot about all this and just took a piece of paper, let's just find something. Just took a piece of paper, take the rest of the paint. The end of a painting session, I don't care what else you're painting. End of your painting session, you're going to throw that paint out anyway. Take a palette knife, scrape it up, and practice doing tiny lines. See what happens when you hold it too fat and it gets a blob. And then practice, let me just grab a bunch of paint here. Practice holding it. Can you do some thin lines? Can you make that? Practice doing what happens when you do this, what happens when you do that. Get used to your toys. And then it won't be such a shock, because when you paint with a palette knife, you end up using a lot more paint than you would normally. And so there's a feeling that if you don't do it right, that maybe you wasted something. So my thought is just try, see what you can do with something. Can you make something look round? Can you curve it a little bit? What happens if you turn it around this way? I'm just going to grab whatever I've got here on the end of my plate. I want you to see that. What happens if I started here and added this? Well, I'm telling you, some wonderful abstracts can be made with a palette knife. Some wonderful abstracts. But you've got to kind of understand how the tools work. And a lot of people try to use them as a brush, and I don't. I wouldn't dream of trying to use this as a brush. See, what do I got? Here's some white paint. I'm just going to show you. Know when you have to dry it and when you don't. Like, for instance, that, even though that's just practice, I want to show you what happens if I put a little white here. I went over that. Now watch what happens if I do this and pull it. It's what happens here, right? Because every time you touch a layer, you're mixing it with the layer behind you. But if you don't have the palette knife loaded correctly, you end up with blobs, and then you're going, oh, I can't make it work. Well, you can. And also, the other thing you can do is you can scrape it off. You can scrape it off when you're practicing. Scrape it off and try again. And if it gets too thick on you, make sure that your palette knife is clean, you've got a strong edge. Practice it. Just get in the habit of practicing with your toys. So I'll just throw all that away because that's going to be a mess. I'm going to pull this little picture out again. This is sort of where we were with this. And we'll just stop here. I'm telling you what, if you thought this was fun to do, and you kind of got the gist of this, I'm going to invite you to try this painting. Just follow the link below. I've got a little hour lesson on this just to do this complete painting, just the way I showed you with this. So you can practice with this. And if you think this might be fun, you want to do some more, follow this link with me to Vimeo, and how to paint, woods with and trees with a palette knife, and the link will take you right there, and it's $5. If you think that would be fun to do, it's like $4.95. Join me over on Vimeo and paint this. So thanks for watching. This is Ginger Cook. I hope you had a good time today. I appreciate your comments and your likes on my channel. I try to give you the best content I can come up with, things that you might really want to learn to paint. So we just sort of put these together like this. You can kind of see what we're talking about. This could almost be one could keep going with this, couldn't one? Just sort of change the color of the trees. You could have quite a painting if you sort of combine these, used your imagination a little bit. Maybe I'd put it this way. Let's see, would we? Well, we could. I mean, you could. I mean, it wouldn't. It's an interesting thought. I mean, you know, what would you do? So, or maybe you could do the background similar to the way I show you in this, and do something like this and have two paintings, and do the trees the same color. But in any event, have fun using the palette knife. I hope you enjoyed it. This is Ginger Cook saying thank you for watching, and I want to just say it's been fun doing this demonstration.